He was tied to a stake with his arms crossed, as if he were Jesus Christ. I can say it was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen in my life. It was so sad. It was so heavy. But I had no time for pity. I had to save him as soon as possible. I am sure this story will shock you, just as I still can't get that scene out of my mind from that day. Before I tell you the full story, a story that changed the very course of my life, I need to ask you for a small favor that makes a huge difference. Please, take a moment to subscribe to this channel, and in the comments below, write, "I love cats," and let us know where you're watching from. Seeing where this story reaches helps me feel a little less alone out here. By doing this, you're not just clicking a button. You're helping us reach more hearts, more eyes, and more ears. A subscription and a comment are like a donation of awareness, allowing these stories to resonate and maybe, just maybe, awaken a conscience or two in a world that desperately needs it. Thank you. The silence out here is a different kind of creature. It's not the mere absence of noise I had fled. The yelling bosses, the shrieking sirens, the endless, meaningless chatter of a life I'd torched in my rearview mirror. No, out here, the silence is a presence. It's a heavy, ancient thing that presses in on you from all sides, so thick you feel like you could reach out and grab a fistful of it. It hums with a frequency older than bone, a low thrum that vibrates deep in your chest. The sun is much the same. It's not just hot, it's a physical weight, a shimmering, suffocating blanket that smothers the landscape and cooks the air until it tastes like dust and dry grass. This is why I came here, to feel something real. I used to chase real with a camera. I was a photojournalist. A damn good one, if you believe the awards collecting dust in my mother's attic. I told myself I was capturing truth, that I was bearing witness for the world. But the truth is, I was just a vulture, packaging tragedy for the public's morning coffee conversations. The moment it all shattered for me was in a flooded town down south, after a hurricane had chewed it up and spit it out. I was getting the perfect shot. An old woman stranded on her porch, the murky, chemical-smelling water lapping at her worn-out slippers. Everything she owned, a lifetime of memories, was floating by in a grotesque parade. Her face was a perfect mask of stoic despair. I was so focused on the composition, the way the late afternoon light was raking across the water, the Pulitzer-worthy story etched in every wrinkle, that I didn't even hear her ask for help. She wasn't loud, just a quiet, tired voice. "Can you help me, mister?" I heard it later on the audio file. A ghost in the machine. By the time I'd packed my gear, she'd been taken away by a rescue boat. The photo won an award. I looked at it in a glossy magazine, and all I could see was a ghoul staring back at me. So I quit. I cashed out, sold the sterile condo that always felt like a hotel room, bought this old beat-up Ford truck, and just started driving. I told myself I was searching for something authentic, something that hadn't been curated for a headline. In truth, I was just running away from the man in that photograph. I was running from the noise of a life that had started to feel like a poorly written script, with me cast as the villain. I'd been driving for hours, the asphalt ribbon of the county highway, a hypnotic, shimmering serpent pulling me deeper into the heart of the country. The rolling hills of the forgotten farmlands undulated under a sky so impossibly vast and pale blue it hurt to look at. Fallow fields, the color of tired brass and brown, stretched to the horizon, punctuated by skeletal trees and the occasional dilapidated barn leaning against the wind. I pulled the truck over onto a dusty turnout, the engine ticking and groaning as it cooled. This was it. This was the spot. No people, no cars, just earth and sky, and that heavy, perfect silence. I grabbed my camera, out of a habit I couldn't seem to break, a bottle of lukewarm water, and started walking, with no destination in mind other than away. I walked for maybe 20 minutes. The rhythmic crunch of my boots on the gravel and dry soil, the only sound in the universe. It was a meditative sound, a grounding one. For the first time in months, the frantic buzzing in my head began to quiet. I was framing a shot in my mind's eye, the way the afternoon light raked across the hills, creating a tapestry of long, dark shadows. It was beautiful, pure, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old passion, the love of light and form that had drawn me to photography in the first place. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a dark line against the muted greens and browns of the overgrown field, a vertical imperfection in a horizontal world, a distortion in the heat haze that rippled up from the baked earth. A trick of the eye, maybe? I squinted, lifting a hand to shield my eyes from the glare, but it didn't vanish. It was too straight, too perfect to be a fence post or the skeletal remains of a dead tree. It had a shape, a form. As I walked a little closer, my curiosity piqued. The form resolved itself. It was a T-shape. Stark, geometric, unnatural. It was a cross. My first thought, a logical one, was that it was a grave marker, some lonely forgotten plot for a farmer who'd worked this land his whole life, or a traveler whose journey had ended here under the indifferent sun. It was a somber thought, but it fit the landscape's narrative of quiet melancholy. There was a story there. But as I drew nearer, step by cautious step, the story started to feel wrong. The cross was too clean. The wood looked new, recently cut, not weathered and bleached silver by decades of sun and wind. It stood there, bold and defiant, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, a fresh scar on an ancient landscape. And then I saw that something was on it. From this distance, maybe 100 yards out, it looked like a bundle of rags, or maybe some kind of bizarre, abstract scarecrow meant to ward off, what, crows? The ghosts of failed farms? My heart started to beat a little faster, a low, anxious thrumming in my chest. There was a palpable wrongness to this, an invisible perimeter of dread I had just crossed. I could feel it in my gut, the cold, coiling knot that vibrated up through the soles of my boots. I raised my camera, the cold, metallic extension of my eye, and twisted the focus ring. The blurry shape snapped into sharp, sudden, sickening clarity. My breath hitched in my throat. I physically recoiled, lowering the camera as if it had burned me, my hand trembling. What I saw didn't compute. My brain tried to reject it, to categorize it as a dream or a mirage. In the middle of the silent, indifferent farmland, I saw a cross. And on the cross, not a man, not a scarecrow, not a bundle of rags, but a cat. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, praying the image would be gone. It wasn't. It was still there. Real. Horrifyingly, profanely real. The questions slammed into me all at once, a chaotic, angry flood that drowned out the pastoral silence. How had this tiny creature, this living, breathing being, ended up here, in this nightmare posture of suffering and sacrifice? And who, in God's name, in this vast, empty wilderness, wanted to see it suffer like this? I started walking again, faster this time. My casual stroll turned into a desperate march. The silence I had craved just moments ago now felt sinister, like it was hiding a terrible secret. Every step kicked up a puff of brown dust, and with every step, the image of the cat became clearer, more detailed, and 1,000 times more heartbreaking. It was a tabby cat, maybe 6 or 7 months old, just past the lanky awkwardness of kittenhood, but still possessing a youthful delicacy. Its fur was a beautiful, muted pattern of brown and gray stripes, now matted with dust. Its head was hanging low, a posture of pure exhaustion. Its front paws were stretched wide, tied to the horizontal beam of the cross with thick, coarse rope that was wrapped tight, so tight I could see from 20 feet away how it cut into its slender legs. Its body hung against the vertical post, a small, fragile shape against the rough-hewn wood. I stopped about 15 feet away, my camera hanging uselessly from its strap around my neck, banging against my chest with every frantic beat of my heart. The scene before me was a masterpiece of casual cruelty. The cat wasn't moving much, just the faintest twitch of its tail, a motion of pure fatigue. The sun was beating down on it mercilessly. There was no water, no shade, just the slow baking heat and a small cloud of black flies that were starting to buzz lazily around its head. I felt a hot, primal rage build in my chest, so intense it made me dizzy. It was a rage directed at the faceless, anonymous monster who had done this. To leave any animal to die is a sin. To stage it like this? This was something else entirely. This was a statement, a performance of evil. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the air into my tight lungs, trying to push the white-hot anger down. Anger wouldn't help him. I needed to be calm. I needed to think. I raised the camera again, my hands steadier now, my old professional instincts kicking in. But I wasn't a photographer in that moment. I was a witness. I had to document this obscenity. I zoomed in on his face, and that's when I saw his eyes. They were open, just barely. They weren't the eyes of a panicked, terrified animal. They weren't wild with fear or glazed over with the dullness of pain. I've seen enough scared cats in my life, in shelters, on the street, in the chaotic aftermath of disasters, to know what that looks like. This was different. His eyes, a shade of mossy green, were intelligent and steady. They were fixed on me, watching my approach with a profound, unnerving stillness. It was the most bizarre thing. He looked calm, resigned perhaps, but more than that, his eyes were not those of a victim. They were those of a witness. It was as if he wanted to tell me something, to show me a secret that nobody else in the world would ever know. He was looking at me as if to say, I saw it all. I know who did this, and I'm waiting for you to listen. It was a crazy thought, I know, attributing that kind of complex human idea to a cat. It had to be a projection of my own shock and horror, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I was looking at something more than just an abandoned animal. I was looking at the silent keeper of a dark, terrible story. I took a few more steps, moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to spook him. My boots made soft sounds in the dust. "Hey there, buddy," I said, my voice coming out as a rough, quiet croak. It sounded alien in the vast silence. "It's okay, I'm here to help." He didn't meow. He didn't even hiss. He just watched me. Those green eyes tracking my every move. The trust in that gaze after what had been done to him by a human was a physical blow. He should have been struggling, terrified, fighting against an existence that had shown him nothing but cruelty. But he wasn't. He was just watching, waiting, witnessing. My anger began to mix with a profound sense of sorrow. This little creature, who should have been chasing sunbeams across a living room floor, batting at a dangling string, purring on someone's lap, was instead hanging on a cross, bearing the weight of some unknown human darkness.
He was an innocent caught in a story he never asked to be a part of. And I, the disillusioned photographer looking for a real picture, had stumbled right into the middle of it. The irony was bitter enough to taste. I had wanted something real, and the universe had delivered the most brutally, heartbreakingly real thing I had ever seen. I walked a slow circle around the cross, my photographer's eye automatically, almost against my will, taking in the details, even as my human heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. This was no makeshift thrown-together thing. The wood was solid, heavy timber, probably 4x4 posts from a hardware store. The cuts were clean. The joints were square and securely fastened. The post was sunk deep into the hard-packed earth. This cross was new. The rope was strong. This was planned. It was methodical. It was a ritual. But for what purpose? I stood there under the blazing sun, my mind racing through the horrifying possibilities. Was it a punishment? A secret message? A sick game? Maybe it was a threat to someone, a twisted territorial marker in a dispute between farmers, though I was miles from any visible property line. The idea of using a cat as a symbol in a human conflict made my stomach turn. It was cowardly and vile. Or was it something more sinister? Some kind of backwoods cult performing a bizarre, cruel ceremony out here where no one would ever see it. The thought was like something out of a horror movie, but out here, with the immense silence and the weight of the empty landscape, it didn't feel so far-fetched. The world was full of strange, dark corners, and even stranger beliefs. Maybe the cat had sinned in its owner's eyes, scratched the wrong furniture, brought a dead bird into the house. The idea of such a disproportionate, insane punishment was almost too much to comprehend. Or maybe, and this was the most chilling thought of all, maybe there was no reason. Maybe it was just for the fun of it. The act of some profoundly broken person who got a thrill from inflicting pain, from staging this little theater of suffering for an audience of none. A game where the only point was the cruelty itself. I looked back at the cat. He let out a soft, barely audible sound, a dry, raspy meow that was more a breath of air than a noise. It was a sound of pure exhaustion. The sun was in relentless. He couldn't have been here for more than a few hours, but in this heat, a few hours was a death sentence. His mouth was slightly open, and I could see his sides moving with the shallow, rapid breaths of a body in deep distress.
I had to act. Now. I started to move forward, my mind finally clear of the questions and focused on one thing: getting him down. And as I took that first determined step, a sound cut through the oppressive silence. It was a whistle, high-pitched, thin, and impossibly clear in the still air. It came from far away, from somewhere out among the hills to the north. It wasn't a bird. It was too sharp, too deliberate for that. It was human, or at least it was made by something human. The sound hung in the air for a long moment, a single piercing note that seemed to vibrate in my teeth before fading back into the silence, as if it had never been. I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed. I dropped into a low crouch, my eyes scanning the horizon, the ridgelines, the deep shadows between the folds of the hills. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing out there. Just a shimmering heat and the endless empty land. But I had heard it. I wasn't crazy. The whistle felt like a warning. It was a clear, unmistakable message. You are being watched. You are not alone. Don't get involved. My blood ran cold. The faceless monster who did this, were they still here, hiding somewhere, watching me through a pair of binoculars from a grove of trees or the window of a distant farmhouse? Was this their sick game to see who might stop, to see what they might do? Suddenly, the vast emptiness that had felt like freedom now felt like a trap. I was exposed, a single, solitary figure in a massive open arena, and somewhere in the stands, someone was watching. My old instincts from war zones kicked in, the heightened senses, the feeling of being in a sniper's crosshairs. My skin prickled.
The cat made that tiny raspy sound again and looked in the direction the whistle had come from. A flicker of recognition, or fear, in his eyes. A new wave of fear washed over me, different from before. It was a primal, self-preservation fear. My mind, my logical, cowardly mind, screamed at me to get back in my truck, to drive away and pretend I had never seen any of this. It was not my fight. Getting involved could be dangerous, even deadly. The kind of person who crucifies a cat is not someone you want to meet in the middle of nowhere. I was torn. My instinct for survival was at war with the burning indignation in my soul. I looked from the empty, menacing horizon back to the cross. The image of the old woman on the porch flashed in my mind. The regret was a cold, hard stone in my stomach. I had been a witness then, and I had done nothing. I would not make that mistake again. But the cat's eyes told me the opposite of what my fear was screaming. They held me captive. All the complex theories, the witness, the secret keeper, all of that melted away in that moment, leaving only the simple, unbearable truth. He was a baby, and he was scared, and he was in pain. His eyes weren't challenging me or telling me secrets anymore. They were pleading. The silent, universal plea of a helpless creature. Please, help me. The whistle could go to hell. Okay, buddy, I whispered, my voice thick. I'm coming. I'm getting you down. I ran the last few feet to the base of the cross. I reached up to the ropes on his right paw. They were pulled incredibly tight, the coarse fibers digging deep into the soft fur and skin, which was already swollen and raw. The knots were complex, layered, and cinched with brutal efficiency. I clawed at them with my fingernails, pulling until the skin on my fingertips felt raw and I tasted blood, but they wouldn't budge. They were as solid as knots carved from wood. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. I didn't have a knife. My brain, which had been so quick to spin theories about cults and secret messages, had failed to register the most basic, practical problem. I frantically patted down my pockets. Nothing but my keys and a wallet full of useless plastic. I glanced at my camera bag lying in the dust where I had dropped it. I scrambled over and tore it open, dumping the contents onto the ground. Lenses, filters, cleaning cloths, a spare battery. Nothing sharp. Useless, expensive junk. Then my fingers closed around it. A small, cheap multi-tool I'd gotten as a stocking stuffer years ago from my sister and thrown in the bag for emergencies. I'd never used it. I fumbled it open, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get a grip. I found the blade. It was tiny, maybe 1.5 inches long, and about as sharp as a butter knife. It was pathetic, but it would have to do. I went back to the cross and started sawing at the thick rope around his right paw. The cat flinched at the movement, letting out a sharp, pained cry that tore through me. I'm sorry. I murmured, my voice tight. I know it hurts. Just hold on. Just be brave for a little longer. It was slow, agonizing work. The dull blade barely bit into the thick fibers. I had to put my whole body into it, sawing back and forth, my arm burning with a deep, searing ache. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. The whole time, that little cat watched me, his breathing shallow, but his eyes fixed on my hands. He seemed to understand. He didn't struggle. He just endured, as if he were giving me strength. Every few seconds, I'd stop, my heart hammering, and scan the horizon, my ears straining for the sound of that whistle again. The silence was back, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged, heavy with unspoken threat. I felt 1,000 unseen eyes on my back. I worked faster, more frantically. My own panic fueled my efforts. I imagined a figure appearing on the ridgeline, a rifle glinting in the sun. The thought made me saw harder. Finally, with a loud, satisfying snap, the last few fibers of the first rope gave way. The cat's right paw fell free, and he let out a whimper, his leg dangling limply. One down. I moved to the other side, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The second rope was just as thick, the knots just as tight. I started sawing again, the blade now sticky and clogged with rope dust. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't. I imagined the person who had tied these knots. I pictured their hands, strong and steady, wrapping the rope, pulling it tight, their face a blank mask of indifference, or worse, a mask of pleasure. The image filled me with a fresh surge of adrenaline, a white-hot fury that gave me new strength. I wasn't just cutting a rope. I was undoing an act of pure evil. I was fighting back in the only way I could. The second rope snapped. The cat's body went limp, his full weight slumping forward. I dropped the multi-tool and caught him, gathering his warm, dusty body into my arms. He was lighter than I expected, a fragile bundle of bones and fur. For a moment, we just stayed there, me kneeling in the brown dust, holding him against my chest, his head tucked under my chin.
I could feel the frantic, terrified beating of his tiny heart against my own, a wild drumbeat of life. He didn't struggle or try to get away, he just collapsed against me, surrendering completely. A gesture of absolute trust that I had done nothing to earn. Slowly, gently, I lowered him to the ground. I expected him to bolt, to run as far and as fast as he could from this place of horror, and for me, the strange human who had just caused him more confusion and pain. But he didn't run. He took a few wobbly steps, his legs stiff and unsure. Then he turned back to me. He walked right up to my hands, which were resting on my knees, and he pushed his head into them. He just rested his head against my hand and leaned into my touch. The gesture broke me. All the tension, the fear, the rage I'd been holding back, it all came crashing down. I sank to the ground, pulling him into my lap, and I buried my face in his soft, dusty fur. I didn't cry, but a huge, shuddering breath escaped me, a sound that was half sob, half sigh of relief. He just stayed there, letting me hold him, and after a moment, a tiny, ragged sound started in his chest, a purr, weak and broken, but unmistakable. After a few minutes, I gathered myself. We had to get out of there. The feeling of being watched was still clinging to me like a shroud. I carefully picked him up, cradling him in my arms, and grabbed my camera bag. I didn't bother to pick up the expensive lenses and filters scattered in the dust. They didn't matter anymore. I left the empty cross standing there, a stark monument to a mystery I would never solve. I didn't look back. The walk back to the truck felt 10 miles long. The cat was a dead weight in my arms, completely exhausted. I opened the passenger door and gently set him on the seat. He immediately curled into a tight ball and closed his eyes. I grabbed the half-empty bottle of water from the center console, poured some into my cupped hand, and held it out to him. He sniffed it, then lapped at it weakly, his little tongue barely making a splash. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. I got in, started the engine, and pulled away, kicking up a plume of dust. I drove faster than I should have on the rough dirt track, my eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. But there was nothing. No figures on the horizon, no pursuing vehicles, just the empty cross shrinking in the distance until it was swallowed by the landscape. An hour later, the sun dipping below the horizon and painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, we reached a tiny speck of a town. I found a 24-hour vet clinic, a small, brightly lit oasis in the dark. The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, with tired eyes and a gentle voice, took one look at the cat in my arms and the raw rope burns on his front legs and ushered us straight into an exam room, no questions asked. "What on earth happened to him?" she asked as she began her examination, her professional demeanor barely masking her horror. I told her everything. The empty farmland, the cross, the newness of the wood, the tightness of the ropes, the whistle on the wind. She listened without interruption, her face growing grimmer with every word. She said he was severely dehydrated and exhausted, but miraculously, otherwise okay. No broken bones. She cleaned and bandaged his legs, her touch firm but gentle, gave him an IV for fluids and a small bowl of soft food, which he devoured in seconds. While she worked, I sat in the corner watching, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. I named him Witness. It felt right. He had seen the worst of humanity and survived. He was not just an abandoned cat. He was a testament to endurance, a living soul who carried a secret I would never know. In that sterile, quiet vet's office, watching him finally rest, safe and warm, I knew he was more than just a cat that I had rescued. He rescued me, too. He pulled me out of my own aimless, self-pitying wilderness and gave me a purpose. For the first time in years, I had done something that mattered. We spent that night in a dusty motel on the edge of town. Witness was restless, whimpering in his sleep, his legs twitching as if he was still tied. I pulled his bedding next to my bed and let my hand rest on his side until his breathing evened out and his dreams seemed quiet. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office in the next county over to report what I'd found. The dispatcher sounded bored, distracted. "A cat, you say? Tied to a cross out by the Miller place? Sir, we get all kinds of strange reports. Probably some kids pulling a sick prank. We'll keep an eye out." His tone was dismissive, final. I knew then that no one would ever look for the monster who did this. The evil would remain anonymous, a ghost in the farmland. The responsibility for Witness's future was mine alone. Today, that cat lives free. The first few weeks were a process. Witness was timid, a shadow that followed me from room to room. He flinched at loud noises and was terrified of anything that looked like a rope, a garden hose, a charging cable, even my own shoelaces. But slowly, with patience and a ridiculous amount of feather toys, he came out of his shell. I even started taking pictures again, not for money, not for acclaim, but for myself. Pictures of Witness chasing a ball of tinfoil, his paws a blur of motion. Pictures of him sleeping in a patch of sunlight, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm of perfect peace. I was finding the real that I had been looking for, not in grand dramatic tragedies, but in small, quiet moments of joy. Witness is no longer a small, terrified cat. He's a big, sleek, magnificent animal. He runs through the grassy park near the small apartment I rented, a place I chose because it had a park, a reason to put down roots, even temporary ones. He chases squirrels with an intensity I can only envy, and sleeps at the foot of my bed every single night, a warm, reassuring weight in the darkness. He is happy. He is loved. He is safe. But every now and then I'll catch him staring off into the distance, his body perfectly still, with that same unnervingly calm, watchful look in his green eyes that he had on the cross. And in those moments, I'm taken right back to that blistering afternoon. I see the empty horizon. I feel the oppressive heat, and I hear that high, thin whistle on the wind. The mystery of who put him there and why remains. It's a ghost that will likely follow me for the rest of my life. I never got the perfect picture I was looking for that day, not with my camera. But I got something better. I got a story. I got a friend. And he is my living reminder that even in the face of the most senseless cruelty, there is hope. That in the deepest silence, a plea for help can still be heard. And that sometimes the most important thing you can do is to simply stop, turn around, and walk toward the thing that everyone else would run from.